Hey guys, I just wanted to check in with you really quickly today because as you continue reading the book, really we're tracing all of these disparate elements, right? We've got the killers who are on the run who seem like they've gotten away with murder, right? We've got the KBI investigator Alvin Dewey, and we see every time he, turns up a new lead, ultimately it leads him to a dead end, right? And we see the town or the village of Holcomb, right? And last time we chatted, last time we talked about kind of some of the things that Capote was trying to do. Now, as you continue to read, you should have a pretty good understanding, even though there are multiple purposes, but you should have a pretty good understanding of some of the stuff that Capote wants to convey to his readers. And so, what this video is meant to serve for today is just to kind of give you a heads up. As this story progresses, you are going to have to choose what you think is Capote's main purpose, or at least what's the purpose that you connect to the most. This is a complex, layered text, and so there are multiple purposes to choose from. And so the way the AP may ask a question about this book is they'll ask you just simply. What rhetorical strategies does Capote use in order to achieve his purpose? And they might just leave the question at that. And so then you have to identify and define not only what Capote's purpose was, but you have to choose and focus on one of them, ignoring all of the rest. And so that's one of the big things that I want you guys to work on, is even when we get those short passages, on those 40-minute essays, ultimately you can't talk about everything that's within the text. So you have to focus on one purpose, and you have to focus on the elements of the text that really kind of strengthen that. So I think that this book is great practice for that. And so I'm going to give you guys a heads up. When we finish this book, and when I ask you guys to weigh in on it, I'm going to give you a couple different purposes to choose from. Your job is going to be to choose one, not to tackle all of them, but to choose one. So I want you to kind of start that narrowing process now. Some of you contacted me when you wrote the 40-minute essays for Into the Wild, and you said that writing about an entire book in 40 minutes was extremely overwhelming. And that's an experience that I'm glad that you had at that point, because it'll make writing about a shorter piece that much easier. And this time, you should know how to manage that writing a little bit better. And so I'm going to give you a heads up now so you can start to kind of collect that information. I've already talked to you about 3 of the major purposes that this book deals with, and we've seen those strengthened in this piece. 1, Capote proves to us that small towns can be forever changed by events like this. In a town like Holcomb, Kansas, where nothing out of the ordinary happens, certainly we see that this town has become wrecked, right? So that's one of the first strategies, or that's one of the first purposes that you'll be able to choose from, right? Capote wrote this book in order to show us how a small town in Kansas was transformed. You can talk about the way he describes it before the murders and the devices that he used there. And you can talk about what's happening now, right? We've seen what's going on in Hartman's Cafe. We've seen, the way the houses are changing and the way the behavior of the people is evolving as well. And so that's one of the purposes that you're going to be able to choose from, right? How does Capote convince his audience of the transformation of this town? How does he illustrate it, maybe is a good word for it. The next thing that we've seen is, how does Capote allow reality to permeate this book, right? This is the very first time that narrative nonfiction existed, right? So even though he's telling a story, how does he lend authenticity to it, right? And with this, I think you can focus not just on, one of the story threads. I think you could talk about how he creates that authenticity with Holcomb, with the KBI in the investigation, and then obviously with the criminals as well. So how does he make his book real? What strategies, does he use to make his book real is another purpose that I think would be strong. Then clearly, I think, a purpose centering around the murderers is probably where we would land, right? I think what he's doing to Dick and what he's doing to Perry are very different things. But I think the purpose that I want you guys to focus on there is, how is he attempting to force or to manipulate his audience into feeling sympathy for the killers? If you wanted to narrow that purpose even further and say, how is he attempting to elicit sympathy for Perry specifically, I think you certainly could, right? We've seen constant comparison between Perry and Dick. We've seen this idea of the sharing of Perry's past as well. We've seen this complex relationship that Perry and Dick have. As you guys have noticed, Dick constantly calls Perry, honey and sweetie and baby. And one of the common questions I get are these criminals gay together? And so, the fact that Truman Capote was one of the most famous openly gay authors at the time, obviously that relationship and the complexity there is important, right? And so if you're thinking that, if you're asking that question of are these guys together, are they a couple, that's purposeful, right? Because that's what Capote was asking as well, and that's what other people were asking. But the thing is the not knowing is an important strategy at this time. To assume, if they are a couple, what does that change, right? How does that affect our emotions, especially to readers in the 1960s, right? But if they're not a couple, what does this inclusion do for Capote's purpose, right? Obviously, we've seen some sexual details of both Perry Smith and Dick Hickok, and so that's something that we can't shy away from, right? And that's something that Capote chose to really focus upon. So the reason that I'm telling you this right now, instead of just kind of springing it upon you, is because now as you continue to read, I want you to gather information, right? I want you to gather quotes. If you wanted to talk about, strategies that are being used, I want you to start to collect those things. So get a sheet of paper, open up a Google Doc, and start typing those things down and say, one of my strategies that I want to talk about is that Truman Capote used beautiful imagery to show how Holcomb was idyllic, peaceful, and perfect before the crimes. And so instead of, having to search and find all those things in 40 minutes at the end of all this, you can have, 6 different images and say, I'm going to choose the one that's the strongest. I'm going to choose the one that's going to make my essay the strongest. Because the big thing is that once you've chosen the purpose, that's what's going to drive the entirety of your essay. You do not need to recap the entire story. Your goal is not to prove to me that you can recite facts from the book, right? And by the time comes to write this final essay, I'll have your Into the Wild essays back to you. Some of you have them. Some of you are still waiting. But you can use that feedback to strengthen your rhetorical analysis. One of the things is that I think I want to really stress to you, especially because rhetorical analysis is the essay that you guys are going to be doing, is your job is not to encapsulate the entire book. Your essay is going to be about just a fraction of this book. But once you come up with what Capote's purpose is, then your job becomes, why did he do this? Why did he include this story? Why did he do it this way? In order to make us feel sympathy, in order to make us recognize that transformation, right? So I want you guys to realize that you are talking about, why did Capote make these, specific decisions, specific examples to strengthen that one purpose? The whole point of analysis is you break up the different parts of something and talk about how they all came together for that similar goal. So in that analysis, you'll say, and this is how, or in this strategy, made the audience feel sympathy in this way. And this next strategy made the audience feel sympathy in this way, further proving his point and further strengthening his purpose. And so that's one of the things that I want you to recognize, is that you're taking one element of this book, but you're just plumbing the depths of it, rather than showing me that you can recite, pieces from all over the text. And so I'm hoping, number one, that this is giving you some enjoyment. I've gotten emails about how people are actually interested in this topic and in this concept. And as we get further into the book, we'll have some kind of bombshell revelations that we'll get to talk about a little bit as well. But at this point, I want you to start gathering information and gathering evidence to help prove your point. All right. Hopefully you're all here. Hopefully you've all made it this part. And I'll tell you, it's no surprise that Dick and Perry get caught, right? Obviously, we know they've been interviewed. I've shown you pictures of them at the courthouse, all those good things. But once they get caught, the story changes drastically. Capote interviewed them. That's how we're getting all these background pieces of information. But once they're in prison, things change and a new purpose is added. And I'm telling you this now so that you're ready for it when it happens. But when these two boys are in prison for murdering the four Clutters, a fourth purpose gets added to the mix. And it's a purpose about what is Capote telling us about the justice system. Is Capote using this book to take a stance on the justice system, on capital punishment, on kind of the way that the court system treats criminals like Dick and Perry? So you've got four purposes to choose from. You can, double down on one right now and just collect information for that, or you can collect information for a couple of them. But I thought that this might be a good time for you to start gathering text and proof and textual evidence and all those good things. As always, ask any questions that you guys have. Please, please, please reach out to me. But otherwise, just keep enjoying the book. All right, have a good one.